Hi, this is Justin Bramlett, and this is my ad assignment. So the general topic of my ad assignment is fairly straightforward. It basically talks about the framing effect and how it dictates our decisions in day-to-day life. Framing effect is basically described as when people give different answers to the same problem depending on how the problem is phrased. The basics of the article are title, framing of decisions in the psychology of choice, the authors, which are Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, and my reference. So the introduction of this presentation is basically what I want to talk about, and this article deals with what exactly will reverse the perception of a person. In other words, how much would I have to change the wording of a question to make someone rethink their answer? And the hypothesis kind of says the exact same thing as I just did. Psychological principles that govern the perception of decision problems and the evaluation of probabilities and outcomes produce predictable shifts of preference when the same problem is framed in different ways. So if I frame a question differently, it's going to shift the preference of these people. So the methods they use are pretty simple. They use questions that pertain to saving lives and money, but I want to kind of look at one question in particular because they have like 5 or 6 and too much to put into like one PowerPoint. So one of the questions is they took a group of people and they told them 600 people will die. You can either save 200 people or you can choose number 2, and there's a 1/3 probability people will be saved, and there's a 2/3 probability that no one will be saved. And personally, I would pick 1 because it's a more for sure thing. And then they took those people away and they brought in a whole new group of people, and they're like, okay, 600 people will die. You can 1, let 400 people die, which is the exact same thing as number 1 above, because 600 people, 200 people live, 400 people die. 400 people die, 200 people live. But it's a more negative look. Or you can pick number 2, 1/3 probability no one dies, and a 2/3 probability that 600 people die, which is again the exact same choice as number 2 above. The only difference that they did was they said no one dies and 600 people die instead of people be saved and no one will be saved. And I kind of like how they say 600 people because it puts it in a more negative light because it gives you a hard number. It doesn't give that, oh, no one. It's just 600 people, and I feel like that's more impactful. Usually, all the other questions are exactly the same. They just give a choice involving gains and a pair of choices involving losses. So the results of this one experiment is basically 72% of people chose number 1, which is saving 200 people, and only 28 people chose number 2, which is 1/3 probability everyone lives, and 2/3 probability no one lives. And this is kind of obvious because I chose number 1 because saving 200 people just feels more. It's easier because you don't have that probability of killing everyone. You have it for sure of saving 200 people. However, when they brought in the second group of people and they showed a more negative outlook, things switched. For example, the second set of problems is different. Only 22% of people went with choice 1. 400 people die. Now, which is crazy because 400 people dying is the exact same thing as 200 people living. But if you put a negative effect, people don't really like that. So they are more willing to take a 78% chance of 78% of people want to take that chance of 1/3 where no one dies and 2/3 where everyone dies. They had to take that chance because, well, it's better than 400 people dying, but not really. So in conclusion, most participants will pick the most risk-averse answer when given a choice with gains. But when given a choice with losses, most people will pick the most risk-taking answer, which is surprising. So this proves the hypothesis stating that if a question is worded or framed slightly different, showing losses instead of gains, people will drastically change their answer. Which brings me to my ad. My ad is a TV ad that's fairly new, but it has a fairly old guy. Well, he's not old, but he's old to me. He's the old Verizon guy that used to say, "Can you hear me now?" but now he's working for Sprint. He starts talking about how Sprint is now within 1% of Verizon. He goes on to say that Sprint will save you 50% on most other phone companies. It sounds very positive. It sounds very great. It made me want to switch to Sprint. And giving an analysis of this ad, like I said, he uses positive language in order to put a positive frame on the product he's going to sell. This is a classic framing effect. While it's not the same exact thing as the study that I showed, it's still using more positive things, giving gains instead of losses. And so, while it's not a perfect replica, I think it still has the same basis of content. So how would I change the ad to test my analysis? Well, I would say keep the original ad. Don't do anything with it. Don't touch it. Keep Paul in there. Keep the Verizon guy there. And he still says say with the they're within 1% of Verizon, and say that you can save 50% on other phone companies. Great. But what you do to change that is you take another ad, record a whole different ad, and instead of saying it's within 1% of Verizon, you say Verizon is 1% better, and you may save 50% by switching to other networks. I feel like this negative look will hinder people from choosing the ad because, well, it's more negative, and they're less likely to pick it. While it is the exact same thing, they're going to be more cautious of it because of how negative it is and how, oh, well, I may say 50%, but they're not as good as Verizon. So I think I'll stick with Verizon, even though it is, like, Sprint sounds better than Verizon, but it's just worded so that it doesn't sound as good. So people are they're less willing to switch to Sprint. And that is my ad analysis.